Welcome to Poemalogues. My name is Dasha Kelly Hamilton, and I'm your host. I am also your Poet Laureate for the city of Milwaukee and for the state of Wisconsin. Poemalogues is a chance to gather some familiar and some brand new faces around our table, as it were, these days, and it's to have a free-flowing conversation about life in between the lines. And one thing about those lines, yes, we start these discussions with a line of poetry, but poetry is just a way to get us at the table. So I'm really excited to have a conversation today about legacy. And when I thought about legacy today, it was shifted a little bit from the idea of my person as a legacy or our work as a legacy, family even, but that legacy of how you leave people, like the last word that you share with people. So I went digging around for last word poems, and I'll share what I found at the end. But right now, we're going to talk about legacy with our guest to the screen. We're going to invite Miss Leah Jepson to make her way to the screen stage space. Hello, Miss Lady. How are you?
I'm good, Dasha. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you making time for being in this conversation today, of all things, right?
I am excited about it. I'm really jazzed.
All right, jazz about legacy. This is going to be interesting. Before we get into your thoughts about legacy to come, or maybe you might be talking about legacy history. Before we unveil, tell us a little bit about who you are. Tell us your whole life story.
My whole life story.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born and raised in Brookfield, Wisconsin. And I have pretty much lived in Milwaukee most of my life. I turned 50 this year, well, in 2020, another milestone COVID birthday in the books. And I have really spent a lot of my life pursuing social justice, pursuing equity, and really working to try to kind of connect the assets in our city to help facilitate change and to help facilitate conversations that might be really difficult. I have no kids. I have two wonderful dogs that I am certain will make an appearance during this recording. It is just bound to happen. And I have a wonderful niece and nephew. My nephew turned 18 this summer. My niece is 15 and 14. Sorry. My parents still live here in the same house I was raised in out in Brookfield. So, I love being outside. I love gardening. I can't get enough of being in the woods, being in the water. I'm that kid.
I love that you're still giving yourself permission to be a kid. You're like, I'm that kid.
Totally, like laying on the ground in the woods, like looking at little tiny mushrooms and things like that. Like that's totally me. So, well, you know this about me. In the summers, spring and summer, I raise monarch butterflies, and it is joyful. I know you've seen it in action.
But you raise butterflies. That still as a concept. So we're going to come back to your fur babies, but you have winged children. How do you raise a butterfly?
So very carefully. It's actually really meditative for me. So we started. We've had 3 years now, 3 summers that we raised butterflies. We were gifted 5 eggs on milkweed leaves. They're monarch butterflies. And we kind of learned how this works, where you have this teeny tiny spot on a leaf that turns into a teeny spot, a teeny tiny worm. And then all of a sudden it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you feed it. And then they're like the size of your pinky. They go into chrysalis a few weeks later after they've gone through what they call instars, 5 instars, and where they shed their skin and then just get bigger and bigger. And then, to put it the least grossly that I can, they transition into this wonderful chrysalis, which looks like jade with flecks of gold on it. It's just gorgeous. They're actually kind of turning themselves inside out and mixing up their DNA and bringing it back together. And then, a week or so later, they, depending on the weather, they emerge a beautiful butterfly. And so, first year we raised 5.
So
last year.
Does that make you a doula? Are you a butterfly foster parent? And you're watching this whole process. I mean, one, just the metaphor and all of that too, how delicate it sounds, but also really sturdy if you're able to get in there and not be in the way. What was that first season?
Yeah, it's a season. So, we, like I said, we were gifted 5 eggs, and we were huddled over our dining room table. We raised them indoors the first year, and then I learned better. We couldn't wait for them to hatch. And when they hatched, I mean, they were as small as like the letters on a dime. We have photos of that. We had 5 monarchs out of the 5 eggs. So we had 100% success rate. And then the following year, I completely got into it, and it was my life. It was the biggest nerd out. We had 95 butterflies that year. I reeled it in last year because I also wanted to actually garden, but we put in native plants and pollinator plants, made a point of that, so that we had a lot of hummingbirds and honeybees. And different really great nectar drinking moths and other butterflies. It was wonderful. And you can tell that their sex when they come out. You can actually learn to tell them apart. And then last year we also raised Eastern black swallowtails, which are the beautiful blue iridescent and black ones.
It's too much. It's too much.
It's too much. They were so much fun.
Yeah. This is things you didn't know, and you thought, folk, we were impressed with people learning how to bake bread. No, raise some butterflies.
Zen.
I was gonna say just the piece in that, very different from gardening. And yes, I know I don't garden, so what do I know? But as I understand it, nurturing, you're caring for these other things. You're caring for these other creatures, and butterflies. That's gorgeous. So
they're endangered.
They stay in your yard? So you just have a butterfly exhibit in your backyard, or do they go to throughout the neighborhood?
They go throughout the neighborhood. So the males so this is what I learned about monarchs. They're the only species that migrates. They come all the way up into northern Wisconsin and beyond. And by winter, the last generation that is hatched up here flies all the way to Mexico, where they overwinter, and they're critically endangered. They're almost critically endangered. They should be on an endangered species list. The freeze in Texas a couple of weeks ago is going to decimate the habitat for monarchs unless everything kind of got killed down there because of the deep freeze. And so I'm hopeful that will be okay this year. It's fun because I've talked to other neighbors of mine into planting more pollinator plants, and they're like, we have monarchs all over the place. And I like to think that they're coming from my yard, but
just roll with that.
Right. Exactly.
And what I'm taking in right now is how much space you have, in terms of information, and also in your heart, how much space you have for all of this relatively new information about butterflies. But this is not what you do. This is not your walk in the world, but now it is, I suppose. So I'm just smiling at, and knowing that you've self-taught this, that this is something that you offered to yourself on the side. And you already have a huge responsibility that takes up a lot of emotional bandwidth. Just tipping my hat to you that you've given yourself this piece.
Yeah, it's when I would get home from work back when I left the house, I would, I'd let the dogs out and hang out, have a glass of wine, and clean my caterpillar cages and get them new food and just dork out. I have a little Jack Russell mix who became extremely jealous, and actually year two got up there and knocked the cages off of the table out of spite. Yeah, he was on my list.
They really are fur babies. So folks who are not pet owners, it is a different relationship. So, as you start to speak about your dogs as actual fur babies, just know I'm here. I feel you. I get you. I get it.
Yes.
But I would love to hear you tell me a bit about how you entered this conversation on legacy.
So this was interesting. I was actually going to go with wonder and talk about my butterflies because there's so much wonder in how that change takes place. And I was torn between legacy and wonder, and then couldn't find like a great poem that really spoke to what I wanted to talk about. And then I Googled legacy and the definition of legacy. And I was actually really kind of, I was taken aback because the way that I think of legacy and the way that the Merriam-Webster or the Oxford Dictionary has it described, and I'm going to read it, is a noun, an amount of money or property left to someone in a will. Quote, my grandfather died and unexpectedly left me a small legacy. And the second one, which was even more annoying to me, is that it's an applicant to a particular college or university who is regarded preferentially because a parent or other relative attended the same institution. Now, I was like, that's not the legacy that I was thinking. Two. Yeah, can we say white supremacy culture?
Stuff and status.
Stuff and status, power and power. And I feel like that, so I immediately went to like white supremacy culture, and this is what legacy means, that if this is what legacy means, then it is discounting all of the contributions that people make to society just by being who they are and being passionate about what they do. Whether you're gardening or whether you're raising butterflies or writing amazing poetry, whatever it is, that to me is legacy. And so I just kind of went down this rabbit hole of legacy from kind of this will shift into a much more positive thing. But I went down this kind of rabbit hole of kind of white supremacy culture and power as worth. And that if the only legacy you can leave behind that is of value is literally money or status, what does that, like, how does that actually create a better place? Or how does that actually, what's the point? Because that just stays, it's so insular that it just stays in your little family silo. And then what? So there's no and then what, as far as I could see. And it really bothered me. So I just kind of started calling that tangible legacy, which is still only one very small piece of legacy to me that is tangible. I mean, you can leave behind a foundation that is funded by your family legacy, right? And you can actually create change for the good. That's still tangible. It's still money, but it's not just going right back into the coffers, right? Sure. Or you're not pushing somebody out of a college because, who could be in based on merit, right? So I got a little snarky about it, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do legacy. And then I'm like, no, I want to run with this. And so I really started thinking about intangible legacies. And as someone who doesn't have kids, right? Like I wasn't raised this way, but society says that if you're a woman who doesn't have kids, what is really your worth, right? What is your legacy? What do you leave behind? And I remember a couple of years ago, my sister coming to town. She lives out near La Crosse, and coming to town to do some photography for her new book. And and working with families that are leading pieces of the Milwaukee Coalition for Children's Mental Health, which is the initiative I lead through Mental Health America of Wisconsin. And she actually ended up dedicating the book to our families that are running the show with this coalition. She was just like, this is such an incredible legacy that you guys, not just me, but that all of us as partners are leaving behind for the city. And to me, like, what I want to leave behind doesn't deal with money, my own money, which is good because I'm a social worker. So not going to like strike it rich necessarily, but you never know. But what are those things that leave the world a better place, whether or changes somebody's trajectory, changes somebody perspective. Like, perspective was another thing I was thinking. So if you can change people's minds, if you can change someone's trajectory in the world to make that difference in children, like, that to me is a legacy, right?
Definitely. I always, when I hear that, when I hear children in trajectory, you know, you have the actual visual of this thing and just a pebble or a bird or a leaf that will knock it literally into another pointed path, and how those opportunities are often never planned. It's just being where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and trusting that you're supposed to be where you're supposed to be when you be there, which is a part of the living part that takes a lot of work. And I think every day we get a little bit better at it.
Yeah, right.
Some days not so much, but I love all of that because it gives us a chance to question the things that we were never told to question, like what you said. What is legacy? If it's not stuff and it's not status, is it the fact that I might have been a pebble that that adjusted a trajectory for the good? Is it how I leave people feeling? Is it? And I also thinking, as you were talking in the space of this pandemic, I remember seeing people remind the populace, hey, if you're not one of the folks out there improving yourself and baking sourdough bread, raising butterflies, but you got up again today, you're doing great. This is hard on everybody. So
even if you didn't get up today, if you get up tomorrow, you know, just that kindness and taking some of the pressure off yourself and really looking at it in a different way. Because go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to read that you got up or not is also legacy, where maybe you didn't discover a new island. That goes back to status, your legacy having to be of grandeur, when getting up is grand in a lot of cases. And to your point, sometimes you don't.
Right. And that's resiliency, right? Like, sometimes you need to just stop and slow down and take a breath. And I'm getting off on a little tangent here, but if we, you know, our overarching culture is about power and status and things and stuff, and kind of that grind culture as well, as far as like workflow and accomplishments and you know, just go. And sometimes, speaking to what you said about getting out of bed in the morning, sometimes that's like a huge accomplishment, especially during a global pandemic, right? I have lived with my own mental health challenges my entire life, and I can totally relate to that. And so, like, resiliency, you know, modeling, you know, being able to be okay with yourself and still getting back up and realizing when you need a little more time down, but then moving forward is huge. And it kind of, through the work that we do, it kind of reminds me of like walking the talk that, so for example, when we stopped having our calls, for example, in August, I realized that I had to take a step back from Zoom, that I was just like going so much. Wasn't just you, just so you know. But I realized that I wasn't taking care of myself, and I wasn't honoring who I was and what I could do. And I really had to kind of reset. And it took several months for me to get to where I felt that I could give again, and I could be vulnerable and out there again. And that in itself, I feel like being vulnerable and modeling that for other people who maybe are struggling for all of that's something that that other people might be able to take and feel a little stronger. I didn't expect going down this path on this conversation.
Hey, those really good conversations. That's what happens. You find yourself exactly the dot that we should be standing on, and yet to be able to model, I'm not okay today, or be able to model, I just need to check out today, and do whatever those things are to make sure that when I check in, I'm fully able to check back in, and we don't get it right every day. And we say these words and we know this, but we don't always, we're not always as patient with ourselves as quickly as we are to say these seemingly patient things. So we get better every day. We get better every day. Before you share the actual poem, is there any, you've said so much for us to look a bomb, reminding us of where these care moments are. So do you have another good word you want to give the people, or anything that you're looking forward to coming up?
Well, I'm looking forward to warm weather and being outside where I don't have to wear 30 pounds of clothing. I'm really looking forward to my milkweed coming in and my little baby showing up. But I think, I think that we as a community could do a better job of allowing each other to take that step back and take that break when we need it. And then that when we are ready to come back, as you were saying, that we are able to be our best selves, and that we are able to give our gifts to whomever our gifts are for, right? It's hard to write poetry. It's hard to do art. It's hard for me to write a grant, to bring funding in to address an issue if I am not all there. And so I think that taking time to reflect, taking time for yourself, to not be on all the time is so important. And so I'm giving everyone permission, right? Because I'm that powerful.
So gracious. You are so great. Thank you. Thank you. You're so kind to all of us. Everything you said about legacy gives us a chance to think about it in a broader space, in a broader sense, and remind us that the ways that many things that have been defined for us, we don't have to keep those carrying forward for legacy to only be about status and stuff. So I'm excited about that, having that idea rolling around in my head for the day. Would love to hear the actual poem that it took you to.
Sure. So a little background on it. Two things about legacy is that one, for our family, I think of legacy as a place, which is a spot on a river, where my mom was raised, where my grandparents lived and died, where I have been ever since I was an infant, where my grandfather rearranged the rocks in the river so I had a safe place to stand and not get sucked downstream. And the other piece of the legacy is that even as we grow older, picking up and expanding what your art or your talents to share with the world is really important. And so I cheated a little bit. I'm reading a poem that my mom wrote about the river, and it's called Child of the Wolf. Child of the Wolf, I fished your tannin-stained waters, tubed down your fast-moving lengths. I swam in your coolness and bathed naked at nightfall long ago. On a hill above your rapids, an engagement. Later, a daughter's simple wedding. You carried the ashes of my loved ones. Soon my own will follow. But for now, mesmerized by your song, I inhale your singular scent, redolent of moss and fir. Your waters will always run through my veins. And that is my mother, Leslie Jepson.
Uh, on so many levels. Thank you for sharing her with us.
Yeah. She's a fangirl of yours.
As
True story.
A lovely and exquisite wordsmith, and that you have this place with all of that family legacy, and that she was able to capture it. I'm going to be a huge fan, captured it in a poem, and that you're able to share her work. And I just see what that space also took, where it took you to. So not just as a memory that you're always going to carry in your bones, but she's also immortalized it by making it in a poem on the page. Thank you for sharing that with us. That was really beautiful. The words, the reading, and where it took you. So I'm really honored to be able to have this moment with you.
Thank you.
And shout out to your granddad.
Right? Yeah, he may be the reason I'm still here today.
A little rascally one, were you?
Oh, just a little, yeah. A little squirrely, a little slippery. Hard to hang on to.
I think by all accounts, you were doing it right. You were doing it right. Thank you sincerely for taking the time out, for being here to talk with me, to talk with us about legacy, and definitely to plant some seeds. Larva, planting larva doesn't have the same warm sentiment to it, but definitely gave us a lot to think about in all of the resources that we already have in these times that are different, challenging, and different. So thank you.
Yes.
That's excellent. So I wanted to share the piece, like you mentioned, legacy can mean a lot of different things. It's the legacy of how you move through the world, of stories that you shared, of ways that you were quiet, of the butterflies that you populated into your neighbor's yard. And they're not all ways of invention and enterprise, and to be reminded that we get to define what legacy means. And I've mentioned that I stumbled into looking for pieces about the legacies that we leave with our words, with our last moments. So I started tinkering around and I looked for some last word poems, and I found The Last Word by Nikki Grimes. I am a door of metaphor waiting to be opened. You'll find no lock, no key. All are free to enter at will. Simply step over the threshold. Remember to dress for travel, though. Visitors have been known to get carried away. I like that. That last word can be punctuation, and sometimes those ellipses get us all carried away. But we keep having conversations, and I'm looking forward to having you back next week for another conversation on joy, justice, legacy, or wonder. Thank you for being here today, and have a legacy day.